Not stop the iPad right in the middle of it. What we're going to talk about in section 1 or 3.1 day 2, we're going to deal with what we call the zero product property. Now, when you look at the zero product property, it's kind of a fancy name, but realistically, what it means is factoring. That's what you're going to do. What it says is if A times B equals 0, then A equals 0 and B equals 0. Now, A and B don't have to be just a number. A and B are going to be parentheses. They're going to be groups. So what you're going to be working on for this particular side of the section is you're going to be factoring it and then setting each side equal to 0 and solving. That's what's going to happen. And I know you've done that before. So you've got something like x squared minus 4x equals 45. Your first step when you're doing this, the first step should be set the equation equal to 0. Is the equation equal to 0 right now? No. Make it. How do I make it? Subtract the 45 over. So right now I have x squared minus 4x minus 45 equals 0. Okay? Then once I have set it equal to 0, my second step would be factor. When you're factoring, don't forget, the first thing you should ask is there anything I can take out of all three terms to begin with? That is the first thing when it comes to factoring you should remember to do. Always ask if there's something I can take out to begin with. Is there anything that all three of them share in common? No, not in this problem, but there will be some that do that. Then when it comes to factoring quadratics, it's nice and easy to put two separate groups like this. And then ask yourself, self, what times what gives me x squared? X. And then self, what times what gives me negative 45? Well, you have negative 1 and 45, negative 45 and 1, negative 3 and 15, negative 15 and 3, negative 5 and 9er, negative 9 and 5. Those are all the groups that can multiply together to give you negative 45. But only one of them is the right answer. So what happened is, or what I asked you so far, is I asked you what times what gives you the front, which is the F part of FOIL. Then I asked you what times what gives me the negative 45, which is the L part of FOIL. Now which one of those groups will make the middle part, or the O and the I part of FOIL, work? What I want to know is when I multiply here and here, which one's going to make negative 4? Negative 9 and 5 has been suggested. Will that work to make negative 4 in the middle? Yeah. Yes or no? Yes. If it does, then you've got it. You can move on. If it doesn't, then you need to try a different pair. Don't forget, if there's something in the A slot of the ax squared plus bx plus c, that's going to aid it. We had a couple of those the other day when we had page 91. So when you're doing this, make sure that that works. If you're just pulling numbers out of the air and it multiplies together to give you the back, great. Might not make the middle though. Or I've had students that make the middle so hard that they forget that it needs to multiply together to give you the back. So be careful. All right? Now that you've gotten it so that it works, then the third step is to set each group equal to 0 and solve. So x minus 9 equals 0 and x plus 5 equals 0. What would I do in the first one?
Plus 9.
Add 9. What's 0 plus 9? And then what would I do in the second group?
Minus 5.
Subtract 5, and what's 0 minus 5?
5.
Done. Okay, first half of your assignment is going to be just like this, where you're going to factor and you're going to solve. Do you recall doing this when you were in Algebra 1? A little bit? Okay, probably not as much as what you're going to do in this one, but that's what we've done. One more like that, just to make sure you guys are okay. X squared plus 2x equals 48. Okay, I'll give you guys a couple seconds to solve it on your own. See if you guys can do it. Now, one thing about the factoring phase, just so that you guys know, it's been a couple years since you factored it. Geometry, you didn't need to factor a whole lot. So when it comes to factoring, the reason why I wrote down all those groups on the side on the previous one was just as a helper. I had someone last hour tell me that helped to see that. So if that helps you, figure out what times what gives me 48. Write them all down. Or negative 48 in this case. Write them all down. And then to see which one make positive 2. That might help you. So as you're finishing, if you're finished in your groups, tell each other what you got. Compare your answers. Okay, so listening to some of your guys' conversations, this is what I've heard from some of you guys. First thing that you should have done was you should have subtracted 48. Did everybody do that? Okay. You got to set it equal to 0. That's step 1. Step 2 came the factoring. What times what gives me negative 48 but adds up to be positive 2 is positive 8 and minus 6. Then, here comes the biggest part that a lot of people mess up, and if you did this, hopefully your partner was able to help you out with this part, is that when you set them each equal to 0, you got to actually go through the process. Some people were just telling me 8 and then negative 6, whereas when you subtract 8 to both sides, you get x equals negative 8, and if you add 6 to both sides, you get x equals positive 6. So be careful. Signs are important. Okay? So what do you think with the factoring? Not too bad? Now, the second half of your assignment today is going to do this for you. It's going to say f of x equals 2x squared minus 11x plus 12. And the problem is going to say, find the zeros. Now, if you recall from last Friday when we were using your graphing calculator to find the answers, what option were we using underneath second trace? Number 2, which said 0. 0 is nothing more than when x, or where's across the x-axis. So when it says find the zeros, you can do one of 2 things, or 3 things for that matter. The first thing that I would do though for this problem is set it equal to 0. So I've got 0 equals 2x squared minus 11x plus 12. Okay, so I'm putting 0 in there for the f of x. Step 2, you have 3 options at your disposal right now. One of them is you could graph it, you could square root it, or you could factor it. Okay, I don't care which method you use. That is your choice. So graphing, if we remember from last week, graphing method was put it into y equals and see where it crosses the x-axis. Can you do that? And if you can't, and if you weren't here, maybe your partner at your table will show you. Square rooting. This particular part will not square root because of one issue. This one will not square root because we have a negative 11x in the middle. If it was just x squared and a number, sure, you could do it that way. But when you've got an x in play, it will not square root. Or it will factor. That's your choice. Some of you I know will grab the calculator immediately to find the answer, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. That's your choice. I'm going to factor this one just to show you a little bit more about factoring. What times what gives you the front? What times what gives me 2x squared? 2x and x. Good. Now, this one's going to be different. What times what gives me 12 that makes negative 11 is not going to be possible with this one because you've got something in the A slot which is going to help it. So to make 12, I'd either have to do 1 and 12, 2 and 6, or 3 and 4. Now, one thing about factoring, if the back sign's positive and the front sign's negative, then I know they're both negative automatically. If I tried one of the groups, most people roll running right to the 1 and the 12 because they think it can make 11 or negative 11. And it could, but remember, I have to have both negatives, and if I have both negatives, that's going to make negative 13. Plus, I won't even make that because this part needs to work. 2 times something, 1 times something, then add them together. So I'm just going to throw the bottom group in there as 3 and 4, and just see if it works. If it works to make negative 11, woohoo, we got it right. If it doesn't work to make negative 11, let's try a different order. What is 2 times negative 4? Negative 8. What's negative 3 times x? Negative 3x. What's negative 3x minus 8x? Negative 11x. Is that what was in the middle? Yeah. So that means we factored it right. Good job for me trying the first group and it worked. Yay. Okay. If it doesn't work, that's where you turn your pencil over to the eraser side of it, erase it, and try a different order and see if that helps. But it did work. So then what's our third step, do you think? Set each group equal to 0 and solve. Sound familiar? So 2x minus 3 equals 0, x minus 4 equals 0. How do I solve the first group?
Add 3.
Add 3, then what? Divide by 2. What's 3 divided by 2? 3 over 2, 1.5, 1 and 1/2. You're all the same there. How about the second group? Add 4. What's 0 plus 4? So x equals 4. So what do you think? If you look at what's going on with some of the problems, the directions will say, first of all, solve the equation by factoring. So they're all going to factor. Then the next group says solve the equation using any method. So you can use the ones we did on Friday, or we could use the ones we did today. It doesn't really matter. In the last group, find the zeros of the function, which is exactly what's on the screen now. So how do you guys think you're going to do?
Okay.
We're going to be okay? Yeah? Okay. So on page 100, (27 to 57) multiples of 3.